All right, and welcome back to another episode of Who's Lifting Today? We're going to be talking about the differences in strength training in your 20s versus in your 40s. First, just a couple of announcements. The Beginner to Badass Lifter course is officially out. You can find it on my website. I'm going to put a link below. If you're looking to become stronger, either you want to start your strength training journey or you're new to lifting and you're not really sure what you should be doing, this is a great course and it's officially out. I'm very excited about it. A lot of work was put into this in the back, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Also, for podcast listeners, I've put a little code below for people to get 10% off. So if you are interested in the course, you can use the code LIFTER. It's pretty excited about it. I have a big focus on helping more people get started with strength training, and this is exactly what this course was made for. Like, I'm trying to get more people started thriving in their strength training journey, either if they're new to lifting or if they're just coming back into lifting after a long break. That's what this course is about. Let me know if you have any questions about it. But yeah, check out the link. And if you want a discount, there is a code below, and then going from there. Second announcement is there's going to be a new podcast name and focus. This is going to be the last episode under Who's Lifting Today. It's going to be called the Badass Lifter Podcast in the future. So for all of you who have subscribed or following or whatever, way that you follow me, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify or whatever, if you notice there's a name change and that you're subscribed to a podcast you don't remember subscribing to, it's still me. We're still talking about strength training. We're going to have like a focus on like if you're a new or beginner lifter, how do we get you started? And if you don't fit like the typical mold of a lifter, that's what the podcast is going to be about. So very excited about the change. That's going to be starting on the next episode of this podcast. I'm very excited. It's a big passion of mine, and I'm very much looking forward to it. But yeah, if you notice that you're subscribed to a podcast you don't remember subscribing to, same podcast. We're going, we're just switching focuses a little bit, and then we're switching the podcast name. All right. Getting into today's topic, strength training in your 20s versus your 40s. Now, I want to make a big disclaimer here. We are obviously generalizing before I get a ton of hate mail being like, well, I'm in my 20s and this doesn't apply to me, or I'm in my 40s and this is not my training experience. We're generalizing here. We are very much, what is typically seen when training with people in their 20s and what is typically seen with people training in their 40s. You might not fit this perfectly, and that's okay. And I have trained exceptions to these rules. We're talking about general trends here. So because I know, especially on the YouTube group, that if you're going to leave a hate comment or you're going to send me a hate email on that I'm generalizing a group too much, typical trends here more than like hard rules. So we'll go from there. I also want to talk about that there's actually a lot of things that are the same that we should talk about as well. Because I think sometimes the messaging online makes it seem like there's completely massive differences, or that like you can't do the same exercises or whatever it might be. And so I want to clear the air on like what's the same first, and then talk about what's different, and then go from there. So it's important to understand that even though you're training in your 40s or 20s, there's not like set exercises for each age group. So like it's, people in their 40s can use barbells, they can lift heavy. There's no like specific type of exercise that's like, oh, you're in your 40s now, you can no longer do that. And I think that's important to understand as well, even though we see like generally speaking, people in their 20s, if you go to a gym pretty much anywhere, are going to be more into the barbells. People in their 40s can use barbells as well. I train women in their 40s who are training barbell exercises, lifting heavy. It's absolutely no problem. So I don't want you thinking that like, oh, I'm in my 40s now, so I can't do these things that I used to be able to do or other people are doing. You definitely can. Like there's absolutely no reason not to. On top of that, the basic training principles and like the theoretical stuff, for the most part, is pretty much the same. Like, when we talk about like specificity or we talk about like program design or anything along those lines, just because you're like, let's say 43 now and not 21, doesn't mean that those like same principles of strength training apply. It doesn't. There's no drastic differences as you age that would be like, oh, this doesn't make sense for people in their 40s. So a lot of the theoretical stuff is pretty similar, if not exactly the same. The big differences I think that are going to show up and we're going to be talking about are the lives that they live and how that makes sense with their strength training routine. So a big example of here is that people in their 40s, generally speaking, they're just in a different stage of life. Like, you might have kids, those kids might be young, you have a career that you're pretty well into at this point for the most part. Again, we're being general here. And you have other things that matter to you other than your strength training results, which is totally fair and understandable. People in their 20s, not that they don't have things going on, like maybe they're in university, maybe they're just starting out their career, but their lives, generally speaking, are more flexible than someone who has kids or are well into their career or well into their business. And for that reason, the scheduling and priorities have to be understood, that people in their 40s don't have like the flexibility and also just have things that matter more to them than their training results. And that doesn't mean that we don't care about their training or that they don't have results they want to achieve, but like, we have to understand that sometimes things in their lives come up where you have your kid's soccer practice, or you have your kid sick, or you have something else that matters more into your life. Like, and that's totally understandable. And therefore your strength training has to be more flexible, and also for that reason, like more quality over quantity. Where I've noticed that if I'm working with someone in their 20s, doing, training 5 days a week, even like 6 days a week, is something that they're more up for. And I think part of that is just because they have the time for it. They can be in the gym longer, like they have more flexibility in their schedule. Whereas someone who, has kids and other responsibilities, family, job, whatever it might be, training 6 days a week just like doesn't make sense anymore. Like it doesn't really make, first of all, it doesn't like really ever make sense. I'm a big advocate for not training 6 days a week. I think we should have more quality over quantity. But I think especially for strength training in your 40s, like you want the highest quality workouts as opposed to quantity. And so I've noticed that of the women that I work with training in their 40s, that they train, 3 times a week, maybe 4, but 4 is kind of pushing it. And then like sometimes 2. And for that reason, they might also be lower time periods. Like they're not going to be training for an hour and a half, 2 hours on average. Like we're looking at like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. And that's just because of the other things going on in their life as well, that the shift is like quality matters a ton because you want to make the most out of the training time that you have. That's like the first big step, is that like scheduling is just very different, and people in their 40s tend to be more spread out with other responsibilities that absolutely matter and should be, I'm never going to tell someone like, oh, you have to go train instead of spend time with your family. Like that's insane. Like, and I've actually heard trainers like go that route, and I'm like, you're crazy. Like, I don't know how you even like got to this part of the conversation. So that's like the first one, is that like, like you're balancing other things, and therefore your training should be like more quality over quantity. The second is that recovery is going to be a bigger deal with strength training in your 40s versus your 20s. So people in their 20s, and I was like no exception to this as well, you can kind of get away with some pretty silly stuff. You're just kind of like young and like resilient, and you can overextend yourself a lot and still like recover for the most part. Like I remember the training I was doing in like my early 20s, and I look back on it, I was like, how did I ever like recover from that? Like it was so much more volume and work than I needed to do. And honestly, not that beneficial if I'm looking, I would not have done that looking back now. But just are able to recover easier in general. Like, even if they, overextend or they do too many workouts, or it's, potentially injure themselves. Like it seems to be that recovery process is less of a concern at that age, with the exception of people who lift like extremely large weights. But if we're talking like the average population, you're not like an elite powerlifter, doesn't seem to be a problem. Now for strength training in your 40s, you need to take care of that more. Like the balance of, recovering, having enough rest days in between training, listening to your body when it feels like it's overextended, or when you feel like you're pushing too hard and you feel really bad the next day, or even like during the workout. you need to listen to that even more, because the recovery process just takes more time in your 40s. And again, like you can still, I work with a ton of women in their 40s, deadlift in the 200s, or like working on it, like very strong women, but like they have to really focus on like, hey, like that workout on Tuesday really, it was tough. Like I might need an extra day of rest here, or like I might need to do one less workout. And like that's part of the process, and that is totally fine. And listening to your body is going to be incredibly important. So focusing on recovery as you get older is going to matter even more than it does in your 20s, where in your 20s, you can almost like weirdly get away with it. I remember when I was training like early 20s as well, is that like looking back at the amount of training that I, like the amount of times that I would like 1 rep max a deadlift, or like just go super heavy for no reason and was able to recover fine. And that's just like not a luxury you can do in your 40s. Like you just, you'll get hurt. Like you just can't do it. Like you have to be reasonable about like when you go heavy, when you go light, how many rest days are you taking in between each workout? Are you giving yourself enough time to recover? And then going from there. And this also brings me to like another big point, is that again, in your 20s, you can make a lot of errors. And I think there's a lot of lifters in their 20s who feel like they know more than they do. This might be slightly insulting. Apologies. Again, generalizing. That like you're in your 20s, you're lifting super heavy all the time. You don't have like a real program, but you're seeing real results almost like in despite of the errors that you're making. And that's just because you're essentially like young and athletic and you can recover from anything, and that your ability to like, so you might feel like you're doing fine because there's no real consequences yet, but it's not actually like good training or optimal training. Strength training in your 40s, there's just less room for those big errors that exist. Now, to be 100% clear, that doesn't mean there's no room for error. And that doesn't mean that you can't become stronger or that you have to be perfect out of the gate. As a new lifter, that is not to be expected of you. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be imperfect. But learning from those mistakes is going to be even more valuable, and continuous, like making like really big error. Like I'll use like an example where like if you're someone in your 20s, you can probably like 1 rep max or deadlift like once a week with like little to no consequence for the most part, unless you lift like really, really heavy. Strength training in your 20s, there are going to be some people who can recover from that, even though it's suboptimal training for sure. In your 40s, you will get hurt doing that. Like that's just kind of like an example. And so there's less room for big errors. Again, you don't have to be perfect. I would never expect you to be perfect. But if you're strength training in your 40s, like you need better program design. You need to be following a plan, listening to your body. There's just like the winging it is not the optimal strategy for this. Like you want to have some kind of focus or structure. So just less room for those really big errors. In general, for training in your 40s, strength training and muscle building is going to take longer than it did before. That's like a big one as well. Now, you can build muscle and you definitely can get stronger, but you just might notice that that path takes a little bit longer than it used to. And, that's fine. Like that's part of the process. And, you can definitely get stronger than you expected to, but those things will just take more time than they did in your 20s. Whether you have trained in your 20s and have kept doing so until your 40s, or if you trained in your 20s, took a break, and then trained in your 40s, the rate at which you build muscle and strength is going to not be as quick as it used to be before. You still can, you definitely still can, but it's just, there's a little bit more patience that's needed there if that is the goal. And then I think the last one, and again, we're just generalizing here. I'm just trying to avoid some like hate emails that are definitely going to come up from this. The focus shifts more to health in your 40s and less about aesthetics as time goes on. I think this is just like true about aging in general, is something that I've noticed, where like, not that people in their 40s don't care about their aesthetics, but that like it's not the end all be all of their lives. They care about being healthy. They want to be safe. They want to be independent later in life. They want to be able to go skiing with their kids or grandkids or like whatever it might be as you age. And then for that reason, There's just there's just more focus on health and less about like just aesthetics. And I think there's a lot of training in your 20s that exists, and I was no exception to this, which is pretty aesthetics focused, whether even if you have other goals, where like you might care about being strong and healthy, but the true driver of what you define as success tends to be aesthetics driven as like the number one. Now, the people that I work with, because of like what I do is weight neutral training, tend to be the exception to this rule. But in general, if I'm going to talk about people who go to the gym and work out in their 20s, it's pretty much all aesthetics focused with maybe a side of something else. And even if you accomplish that side, whether it's strength or health, but you don't have the aesthetics part, there's like a part of you that like is still unhappy with the training. Tends to be a pretty big focus on most people. And then as you start training in your 40s, this is just your different part in your life where, yeah, you still care about what you look like you were all human, but the focus is definitely more strength focused, more health focused, and like the aesthetics becomes more of like a side thing as opposed to the main thing. And I think part of that is just as you get older, you realize that like what you look like is a very small part of who you are, and you're much more than that. And there truly are things that matter more than what you look like. And for that reason, you want your training to benefit you beyond just like how it changes how your body looks. So that's like one big thing that I've noticed. For people, I don't want people taking away from this that training in your 40s is like less fun or not as good of a time as training in your 20s. As I was like writing out the ideas for this, I was a little concerned that that's how it would come across. I want to be very clear. Strength training in your 40s is like very rewarding. The reason it's very rewarding is because not only do you realize how strong you are and what your body can do, but it also gives a ton of value both in and out of the gym. And becoming stronger allows you to be more independent, spend better time with your kids. You're more involved with what your kids can do. You are able to be stronger than you thought was possible in your 40s. And you can do really cool things that I think for some people thought that part of their life was over. And that should not be the case. That strength training in your 40s is incredibly rewarding. You can still become very, very strong. And I don't want you to miss out on this opportunity, because I've worked with a bunch of women now who strength training in their 40s, they love it. They love how it makes them feel. They love like what it allows them to do in and out of the gym. They know regular tasks now are like super, super easy that used to be super difficult, and they just feel cool doing it. Like it's just something that's like their own self-care. It's their own, like self-project and making time for themselves. And I think that's like underrated for people who have so many other things going on and so many obligations to so many people, that having this strength training as part of their life is incredibly rewarding. So I don't want you to look at this list and you're like, oh, I should have trained in my 20s. Damn it. Like, no, it's still valuable. I promise. Like, it's a really noteworthy journey, whether you have been training in your 20s and are now training in your 40s, or if you're just starting to train in your 40s. This is an incredibly rewarding experience, and I don't want you to miss out on it. Let me know if you have any questions about this. Let me know if you have any questions about this. Let me know if you have any concerns about strength training in your 40s. Highly recommended for everybody to do. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. But thanks for listening to another episode of Who's Lifting Today?